This has become kind of my favorite part of the show as we've done this. I'm going to bring up a new friend of mine. She's an incredible author and writer. She wrote a very, very good book that I really enjoyed called The Women Who Made New York. She used to write for the New York Times. She's written for Newsweek. She has a really great nonprofit also called Get Media Savvy, which is what I'm doing by getting one of these. Come on. Who's with me? All right, anyways, before we digress too much, please welcome to the stage the amazing Julie Scelfo, everybody! Let's give it up for Julie, everybody.
Hi, everyone.
Yeah.
I'm not used to being interviewed. I'm usually the one doing the interviews.
Yeah, well, here we go. Got a professional interviewer here. That's not true. All right. Well, let's get this show on the road. That is Julie there. This is the book that I was telling you about. It's such an amazing book. It actually inspired me to make a couple videos kind of based on the amazing women in the history of New York City. Obviously, there are tons and tons of male names and men who've, the Stuyvesants and all the Roeblings and all that stuff. But, there's very little talk about the women of New York, and this is what that book does, if that's not obvious enough, okay?
You're going to send me royalties, right, for the stuff that you were showing earlier?
Yes, exactly. Well, I'll get you one of his books as well, or his beer. All right, anyways, let's get this show started, this interview. You ready to do this?
I'm ready. Hit me.
All right, let's get this started. First question, hard hitting, let's do it. How are you doing?
I'm good. I was trying to figure out how to prepare for this, and I thought just get a drink, and I'm ready. I think I'm ready.
Yeah, you prepare. When you prepare for stuff simply by getting drinks, that might be a problem. But I'm not here to intervene. Let's keep this moving. All right, here's the first question. Why does representation matter?
There's the old saw that representation matters because you can't be what you can't see. And I don't entirely think that's true. I mean, I don't know how many, Nicaraguan American tour guide comedians you saw that you were inspired to sort of find your own way. But I think representation matters because facts matter. And if you don't have an inclusive point of view, if you're not working as hard as you can to get as many perspectives as you can, then you're actually not getting the whole story. So for me, representation matters because if I want to really know what's going on in the world, if I only look at it with one lens, then I'm missing out on so much.
Yeah,
so.
I agree. And I think what I love about history too is that it's never really finished being written because you can always look at perspectives that aren't given. You could always keep kind of rewriting history that way. You're given one narrative and you can give different ones, like this book does kind of.
Yeah, I mean, when I started research for the book, I went through all the major, the Encyclopedia of New York and all the sort of best-known books about New York, and I went back to the index of each one, and I took my finger down, and I looked for every woman's name I could find, and there weren't very many. And I realized that even if all the information in these books was 100% accurate, if an alien came and wanted to know the history of New York and looked at these books, then where were all the women? Like, they were just completely erased. And so you didn't really have the full story of how the city was created and who had been here. So that's why representation matters.
Yeah. Oh, and just to be clear, there's no other Nicaraguan comedian tour guides, is there?
You did it. But
Okay.
But just think, there can be so many more.
Okay, good. Yeah, well, if there was, that would be a problem, to find that guy. Convince him to quit. Okay. All right. Why do some people find it necessary, I guess, to exclude people from history or the telling of history? Why has it been that way? What do you think motivates it?
Look, there's certainly a question of power, right?
Sure.
Like the hunter writes the story, not the lion. But I don't know that people feel it's necessary, although I think often people don't realize that's what they're doing. I think that we're all pretty narcissistic, and we tend to see what's important to us, and we don't always see the full picture. My own dad once was really excited about doing our family genealogy. He'd been working on this for years, and I couldn't wait to find out about it. And so I asked him about the genealogy, and he told me about everything in his father's family and where they all had come from, and he had went back. And then I said, okay, and what about your mom? And he said, oh, I didn't do that. And I was like, oh, well, she is half the family. It is part of the story. But just that wasn't the perspective that he had. And I think that's so often the case. People who are telling the story are looking at it a certain way.
Yeah, that's true. Hopefully they're not at the show and they're arguing about that on the way home for telling that story. It's like, honey, you told the story again, All right, here we go. Out of the stories, so just so you guys know, the book is kind of a reference book. Julie researched a ton of different stories, a ton of different women, and categorized them by the different kind of fields where they excelled and where they made a mark. And there was a ton of them. A lot of different women were covered. Among these, which of the stories would you say, if you had to be put on the spot, which of the ones would you say is the most important, or the one that kind of conveys your ideas the most?
Okay, that's impossible. But I mean, they weren't so much like categories of stories as much as I wanted to represent all the different facets of New York City life. And I wanted to represent all the different ways that women had contributed. And so some of the chapters are really, obvious things like Wall Street or the Harlem Renaissance or Broadway, Madison Avenue. But some of the chapters were more esoteric. So there was a chapter called The Liberators, for example. And those are women who worked for the liberation of all people or of specific groups who were oppressed. There was another chapter called The Caretakers, and the point of that chapter was to look at women involved in the work of caretaking, but also not that caretaking was an ancillary thing. Like, you can't have a functioning society, you can't have a healthy workforce unless you have healthy people. So you need childcare, you need healthcare, you need nurses, all of these kind of jobs that we're so traditionally looking at as of secondary importance,
right.
I think should be treated as just as important as other contributions.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mentioned Lillian Wald earlier. Lillian Wald and women like Lillian Wald would literally, back in the day when it was like the 5 Points. I don't know if you guys have ever seen Martin Scorsese's Gangs of New York. You guys seen that movie? It's that 36-hour movie. But it's good. And back in those days, there were literally, nurses and caretakers like Lillian Wald would jump on the roofs of these buildings and go from building to building and checking on different groups and everything who couldn't afford healthcare, proper healthcare, and things like that. And I always thought that it's interesting how those kind of things don't make it into the history books, being as interesting as they are. Yeah,
I mean, also, during great periods of immigration into the city, there were all of these people who were used to living outdoors quite a bit, and suddenly they were living in tenements where there wasn't there wasn't ventilation, there wasn't enough running water, faucets, latrines for the population, and disease spread like crazy. So this was a time in human history where groups from all over the world were beginning to commingle, and there were a lot of diseases, there were a lot of STDs, and that was actually how Margaret Sanger got her start. It wasn't about abortion, it was about overturning Comstock, because Comstock law prevented, it made it illegal for doctors to talk to women about birth control and about disease prevention. And so she was trying to help educate women, especially poor women, about what they could do to keep themselves safe. Rich women could get somebody to tell them in private, but it was much harder for poor women.
Right. And if you guys aren't familiar with these laws that restricted women's rights, don't worry, we're headed back that way now. God, not to get dark on you, but good Lord, holy Lord. All right, let's keep it moving.
It's a comedy show. It's real life.
Everyone's like, damn, he's right. Check, please. Let me get the hell out of here. All right. Lighten up. Stuff, we'll bounce back. We're in New York. That's what we do. Okay, anyways, here we go. What surprised you the most about doing the work and researching and writing this book when you started to write it?
I think what surprised me the most was how many women were hiding in plain sight. After the book came out, there was the movie Hidden Figures. There was, Nevertheless She Persisted, and all of these moments where I think as a country we began to pay more attention to the hidden stories of women. But what was amazing to me is how many they were just right in plain sight. Another New York spot is Sardi's Restaurant, sort of a famous Broadway restaurant. So the restaurant is Sardi's, SARDI''S. And all of the media coverage from the era when it was founded was about Mr. Sardi. And Mr. Sardi wrote an autobiography, and in his autobiography, he's like, why are they always talking about me? I opened this restaurant with my wife. It was her idea. She hired all the people. She made the menu. I worked the door. She worked the register. So it's our restaurant. And I was like, oh my God, can't they just take the apostrophe and put it after the S? Why is that so hard? But that's how so much of our history was written. So.
Yeah, and like you said before, the history is written with these kind of subconscious biases and all this stuff. The story that I love is, one of the stories I love is the one of Emily Roebling. If you guys don't know who Emily Roebling is, that's right, Emily Roebling's here, everybody. Give it up for Emily Roebling. No, Emily Roebling was the wife of Washington Roebling, who was the son of John Roebling, who designed the Brooklyn Bridge. And so John Roebling came up with this crazy idea to build this bridge, longest suspension bridge in the world. It was a huge deal. Problem is, he dies 6 weeks into building the thing. So who's going to build it? His son, you know? And then he gets a bad case of the bends. Not going to go the whole thing, but guess who takes over? Emily Warren Roebling. She basically learned on the job for 12 years, basically was the head of the actual construction of the Brooklyn Bridge, which at the time was the longest suspension bridge in the world. She was telling a bunch of immigrant men what to do at a time when women couldn't even vote. She taught herself, engineering, and was the reason why they did not lose the contract to build that bridge. And yet, this is the crazy thing, they put the plaque on the Manhattan Tower of the bridge, thanking John Roebling, thanking Washington Roebling, and didn't even mention Emily Warren Roebling.
She's there now, though.
That's right,
Isn't she there
Ivan.
now? She's there now.
She is, but she's in a different plaque. They put a plaque on the Brooklyn Tower. The Brooklyn Tower, all right. And what's crazy, though, is on that tower, the Brooklyn Tower, it was in the 1950s, they put a plaque that basically says, like, oh yeah, and she helped too. It's like this patronizing, on the back of every great work by a man is the devotion of a woman, something like that, as if she didn't actually do the whole thing,
Yeah, her husband was like basically unconscious,
Yeah.
and she did it all. So it's an amazing story.
Yeah, it
and,
really
and
is.
all the guys who worked on it knew it was her. So
Yep.
when it opened, the day that it opened, they insisted she be the first person
Yep.
to go across it, which I think was very cool.
And she was before the President of the United States and the Governor of New York. Pretty big deal. Pretty big deal. So Emily Warren Roebling, everybody. All right. Here we go. So I love you have the nonprofit Get Media Savvy, which I think is super interesting. So Julie has a nonprofit called Get Media Savvy that talks about, I guess, especially today, this is interesting, I want to talk about it, is how you can kind of sift through all the noise, how you can kind of be an educated or more aware and self-conscious, I guess, consumer of media. Do you want to kind of explain what you do, I guess?
Well, so it's really hard to sift through all the media right now
Yeah.
because it's such a shit show.
Yeah.
That's the technical term for it.
Yeah.
But, before I became a journalist, I earned a degree in something called media ecology. And media ecology is the study of information environments and the role an information environment plays in shaping our perception. Because when you communicate through a medium, it shapes how you see the world. So just like we were talking earlier, that we have all these sort of built-in biases, when you're communicating orally, there are certain types of information that are more memorable than other types of information, right? Certain sounds, repetition, musicality, that kind of thing. If you're communicating visually, certain types of information is going to stick out. More attractive images, things that are powerful, more stark. And when you communicate through social media, it's amplifying ideas that are really provocative, it's emotional, it's incomplete, it's really short, and it's a completely different thing than, for example, what you do in traditional journalism, where the goal is to not give your first opinion, but to think critically, do as much research as possible, and do as much fact-checking as possible before you say anything publicly. So over the last decade, I've watched as all of these newsrooms have behaved in really silly ways in terms of adapting new technologies when it's not always in service of what their mission is. And it seems like now we're living in a world where there's so much media chaos that it's contributing to a broad array of problems, from a breakdown in democracy to a mental health crisis for teens. And it's got to stop. So I started this nonprofit initiative. I'm still building it, and it's a group of people who are working to fight media chaos and give people the tools to defend humanity, which sounds really grandiose. But indeed, everybody who's part of it is human first, meaning we think that what's more important than more technology and more profits is actually human well-being, and that we should use technology in service of what we want and not just because it's more bells and whistles.
So just to clarify, you're saying that the media isn't totally good? Is that right?
I'm saying that we need some boundaries. We need
Yes, of course.
we need to differentiate between different types of media. Like, nobody should be going to like the Comedy Channel
Right.
to get medical information, and nobody should be going to social media to get facts. So.
Well, so that my follow-up question would be, how can you tell the difference then? I guess that's one of the problems I guess people have. You go online, you go to whatever website, you go to whatever newspaper, what are you even looking for? How do you even know? I mean, if all of them are owned by a big company, if all of them are owned by, whatever, they're all going to have similar agenda at the end of the day. Obviously, they cater to different markets, but how can you actually know what you're looking at is reliable?
So there's this really archaic sound. It's kind of archaic sounding, but there's this thing called media literacy, which is a type of education that just gives you the basic tools to be able to differentiate different types of media. You know, if there's a drink right there, and you know, let's say it's filled with water. If a poet's going to describe that, it's going to be completely different than if a scientist is describing it. It's going to be completely different than like a thirsty person, right? And so we need to know when we pick up a certain type of media what purpose it's serving. You know, who made it, for what purpose, and that gives us some critical thinking tools to how we judge it. So part of what we're doing at Get Media Savvy is we're advocating for mandatory K through 12 media literacy education, providing some free media literacy tools for adults so that they can know what to do, and to insist that we get some regulations because we are so far behind in regulating what's out there, and it's allowed all kinds of, you know, online hate, all kinds of terrible growth of hate groups, because that's what that media is really good at, is amplifying emotion.
Yeah, I guess it preys on your emotion. So you guys are going to be teaching, like, you know, kindergartners could probably teach that class right now. Kids, they know how to use everything so well. They're so, I guess, adept at even navigating that stuff, but which is kind of scary, actually, to be honest.
Well, it is scary, and I mean, you know, not to just to try and make it more depressing than the abortion stuff. You know, I did a story a couple of years ago about the growing rates of suicide among tweens. These are children, 10 to 14. 10 to 12, preteens. It's the number 2 killer of kids that age in the United States. And when I learned this, I'm like, okay, things are not okay. And so we can't just keep acting like everything's okay, and we can't keep buying devices for our kids being like, oh, it's not really good, but it'll be fine. No, it's actually not fine. So we need to make some major changes.
All right. Well,
that's me on my soapbox.
Yeah. Well, what do you think of my new phone?
I'm inspired. I mean, you know, the product is us, right? Like, attention. I'm inspired. Like, I think it's great.
Guys, this is the future. I'm not. This is the iPhone -13. I'm telling you, this is the future. We're all sick of it. We all know it's bad for us. This is the only way we're ever going to get out of it.
It's sexy. You're going to get a lot of dates, right?
Yeah, right. No, let me tell you that. Definitely not. But it definitely has. I'm telling you, I've only had this thing for like 3 weeks, and I've already noticed a huge difference when I'm out and about, like on the subway, whatever. You have no choice but to be present. Even when you're not on your phone, it's there. Like, it's like, oh, there's no one around. Should I take it out? No. I should. You have that struggle. That struggle doesn't exist if you don't have the phone. But anyways, not enough preaching. We got to get to the important stuff here. Now it's time for the rapid fire questions. Look at that little, we're setting our faces on fire.
Fire, yeah.
All right, that's a cool little graphic. All right, here we go. First one. We're lightening the mood here. You know, okay, here we go. What is your favorite New York City memory?
I did a book event when the book first came out at a Strand pop-up in the middle of Times Square, and it was completely surreal. So New York.
Well, just being in the middle of Times Square doing a book
event?
Like
trying to talk about my book about New York in the middle of Times Square with
they're like break dancers next to you.
Break dancers, cartoon characters. It was
yeah, right. You have like Elmo throwing stuff at you. It's perfect. Well, that's cool. That's pretty cool. Times Square, you probably haven't been back since, I imagine, right? You guys ever been to Times Square? Don't go. Okay, don't go. And if you do go, don't take any CDs, all right? You hear that? All right. Here we go. What's the craziest thing you've ever seen in New York?
I mentioned a couple in the introduction to my book. One is rated X.
Man.
It involved a man anointing a subway handle with a private part of his body. So it's kind of crazy to see that because I kept thinking of the people who are coming in after. But I think the really craziest thing, my husband, before we were dating...
Is that guy?
Not that guy. That was a bad segue. Bad segue.
Give it up for the subway anointer, everybody.
For his birthday, I took him to the middle of the Brooklyn Bridge at like midnight to have birthday cake in November, and we were like trying to light candles on this cake in the middle of the night, in the middle of the bridge, and it was windy, and it was just us two, and it was supposed to be romantic, and all of a sudden, like this group of naked teenagers started. They were running by. I think they were in like a fraternity. It was hazing. It was really weird, but it was so New York. So.
Notice a trend here, guys, I think every crazy story in New York involves nudity. I don't think there's any way around it, unfortunately. All right, well, that's the craziest thing. Okay, well, let's get into some art. What's the last music you've listened to? Oh, for you Gen Zers, an album is just like it's like a collection of songs by an artist. Just so you know.
De La Soul, 3 feet high and rising.
Oh, nice. That's cool. That's cool. Mine was Patti Smith. You guys know Patti Smith? Horses?
She's in the book. She's in the book.
Yeah, she is in the book. She's great. Patti Smith, everybody, come on up. No, I'm just kidding. One day. That'd be cool, huh? All right. Anyways, here we go. Last album. All right. What's your favorite place you've ever visited outside of New York?
Outside of New York?
Yeah.
I thought you were going to ask me in New York, and
No,
I was
no,
going to tell you
okay,
Susan
wait.
Sontag's apartment.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
That was the most amazing space. But outside of New
Yeah.
York? Mexico. I love
Mexico. What part of Mexico?
I love Sayulita, but anywhere in Mexico.
Anywhere in Mexico. Okay, Mexico's cool. All right, you got any Mexicans in the audience? All right, we got to work on that. That's a problem. Diversify the audience a little bit. Okay. All right. Who is your favorite? Writing a book about important women in New York's history. Who's your favorite ever woman TV character?
I don't know. Anything Natasha Lyonne plays. Maybe.
Which like Russian Doll, Natasha?
Yeah, that's great.
Oh, okay. You know that was over in the East Village, 7th and B. That was where they filmed that scene that kept repeating. Don't want to spoil anything, you know. I would say mine is probably Carm, Soprano.
Carm is a good Edie Falco.
Ooh, man,
Carm
that
was quite
is.
a character.
Listen, guys, if you guys haven't seen The Sopranos, you need to get your life together. This is an intervention. That is the best TV show ever made. Okay. So knowing everything you know, having done the research you've done, being exposed to different things going on in the world, having worked in media and all that stuff, what gives you hope?
My kids, they're awesome. I got 3 sons, and they're New York City kids, and they love being in New York. They love people, and they wake up every day excited to be here, excited about their adventures. It gives me a lot of hope.
That's good.
Life is good, man.
You hear that, guys? We should all keep hope because of Julie's kids. Julie's kids, everybody. Julie's kids. All right, guys. Here, that concludes the rapid fire questions.
Right.
Are there any questions from the audience? There is a mic right over there. We have a couple minutes for some questions. If anyone has any questions, don't be shy. We are here together. We're hanging out. We're just a bunch of New Yorkers, just whatever, doing this thing.
This is such a New York thing, by the way. I mean,
Sure.
It's not every day you get an invitation to come talk to a tour guide comedian in
Sure,
the
tour
Lower
guide
East Side.
comedian.
I'm like, it's awesome.
Yeah, it sounds so
see
terrible
you
that
now.
way. That's like what they. Oh, come on up to the mic up here. It's over here on the side. Tour guide comedian sounds like what my uncle describes me as. He's like, oh yeah, the tour guide comedian. The lawyer. Oh hey, sorry, I'm rambling.
Hey, Julie, you did so much work on with women who made New York. Madame Restell at all?
She's a really interesting character. I mean, for those who don't know her, she was an abortionist, and she became very wealthy providing abortions in the city. And what was interesting in my book, I feature Elizabeth Blackwell, who was the first woman in the United States to become a doctor. And she became a doctor because when she was a kid, her older cousin had a disease which they didn't know we didn't know as much then, but it was probably uterine cancer, and it was very painful for her. And she talked about how what made it hard was on top of going through this was that all the doctors were men. And so Elizabeth vowed to herself that she would become a doctor, and she applied to a dozen medical schools, and 11 of them rejected her. And the last one thought it was so funny that a woman applied. They left it up to the men students to vote whether she could go, and they said yes because they thought it was hilarious. And she came, and she was so brilliant, and she was so smart, and she was so well-mannered that it actually made the men behave. But when she came to New York and she hung out a shingle on University Place, nobody would come see her. And she was so broke, she was actually destitute. And finally, she turned to some of her former classmates who all had jobs in hospitals. They gave her some money. She started a clinic on the Lower East Side. But it was a fascinating sort of moment in history because Madame Restell became phenomenally wealthy, bought one of the largest townhouses in Manhattan, and Elizabeth Blackwell, who was this pioneering physician, she later started the first medical school for women. She had a really tough path.
Pretty cool story, man. It's interesting because so many of the women in your book are are the firsts of so many things. I think one of the great stories is Frances Perkins. If you guys don't know the name Frances Perkins, she was the first cabinet secretary in the history of the United States under FDR in the 1930s. It took all the way till then. But she was actually a witness to the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire right next to Washington Square. She was there watching it happen. And that actually motivated her to continue to push and fight for rights. And she eventually became the cabinet secretary for labor under FDR. That's kind of cool, you know?
And she told him that she wouldn't take the job unless he agreed to back her on a few different things. And the platform that she cared about was minimum wage, workers' comp, no child labor, and universal health care. And he agreed, and they got the first 3 or 4, maybe there were 5, finished in his first term. And as you know, we still haven't gotten to universal health care. But she figured out by then that we needed it.
Still waiting on that. Well, that's great. Well, I just have... we got a question? Yeah, sure. Oh, yeah. Oh.
I mean, so you know, people a lot smarter than me figured out the importance of media literacy many years ago. And in Canada, for example, it's been part of the curriculum for decades. So there are organizations that have media literacy curriculum. It's available online. We're partnering with some of them to share it and trying to make it a little more fun and accessible. But New Jersey just last month became the first state in the country to pass a law mandating K through 12 media literacy standards being set by its Department of Ed. So that it's part of the curriculum all the way going up. Because what you teach a 6-year-old is very different than what you teach a 10-year-old or a 14-year-old. And that's why the media is so chaotic right now, right? Because, you know, when we were kids, you know, I'm going to show my age, but like the TV went off at midnight, right? And once there was cable and you could see anything at any time of day, certainly your parents, they weren't going to let you have access to that stuff. Now, the second we give our kids a phone, they have access to the entire world. And so children are being bombarded with like a fire hose of content that's totally developmentally inappropriate. And so we can say, that's developmentally inappropriate, son, but it doesn't help them because they're still inundated. Right. So it's really overwhelming people. And, you know, on my website or getmediasavvy.org, you can, that's where the stuff is coming. It's coming up.
There's a plug right there. Nice
plug.
That was a plug.
That was a plug.
Sick plug. All right. Thank you. Okay, so thank you so much. I just have one more question, Julie, for you. I ask all my guests. This is a big, very important question. Will you be my friend?
I'm already your friend, Tom. I am so happy to be here. Thank you for coming. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Julie, thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much. Please give it up for Julie Scelfo, everybody. So great.